not gonna waste that much time. Y'all know why you clicked here. The title's below. This is going to be the quick review of the Tangzu HBB collaboration Wu Zitian Heyday edition. Wu Zitian, Zitian Wu. Well, you get the idea. Huge thanks to the King Edmund Chan for sending these my way so that I can get a chance to review them. So with all that said, let's actually start talking about this. The Zitian Wu Heyday edition is another rendition by HBB. Mainly, some people call it a second rendition, some people call it a revamp, some people call it an improvement from the original Wu. I personally do not like to consider that to be an improvement, which I'll tell you why later in the sound section, which again, y'all can skip if you don't want to listen to my introductions and ramblings, all of that. But yeah, the main difference is basically on the build standpoint. You have now a full metal body shell, which to be honest, it's actually quite surprising to say the least, which I'll talk about later. And the second thing is definitely the cable. You have a more upgraded version of the cable. This thing is a little bit more stiff. Based on what the box said, it is 5N oxygen-free copper. But the most important thing out of all of this is that basically the Heyday edition has a different tuning than the original Wu. Before we actually get into that, let's actually talk about the unboxing. This is a $200 IEM. I will not compare it to the original because if I'm not mistaken, the original, I think it's already discontinued, and also I have never heard of it, so I can't really have any comparisons of it. Nevertheless, $200 US, you are getting quite an immaculate packaging with, you know, the Empress right here, which is Wu Zitian. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have China history, I'm sorry. But anyways, taking this off, you will be greeted with a soft touch type of black box, and opening it up, you are being greeted with a thank you note saying that, "Dear customer, thank you for purchasing," or something like that. I never really read this, but the main point is that once you open it, you will be greeted with the two head shells that are seen right here, which I removed, but you can probably see in the B-roll. And removing the foam cutout that houses the head shells, you will see an array of tips ranging from balance to base enhanced to foams, which for some reason I still don't understand why they call it foam. It's literally something like the LeShowa stock tips. And last but not least, you get this very big case. Now, accessories wise, it is simple. They give you everything you need. They give you a wide array of tips, which is quite nice, and I'll talk about a little bit of it later. You know what I like about this case? Not sure the camera can pick it up, but it has partitions. It has partitions. Having partitions is a plus for IEMs that are not only made of metal, but that also scratch easily, which in this case, the Heyday edition definitely scratches easily. And well, I own a Kato, and there's a reason why it is so scratched, and it's definitely not because of use. Well, maybe it's because of user use, but you get what I mean. Yeah, definitely not my best way of winding up cables, but you get the idea of this. As you can see, it has its own compartments, and there's a divider so that, you know, the head shells get to live in their own space. And when you close it up, it does not clink at each other. It does not bang into each other. You get what I mean. And speaking of cable winding, let's actually talk about the cables, which is the first thing that is a build improvement. Owing to the $50 bump in price from, if I'm not mistaken, I think $149 to $199 US, this cable is definitely an improvement, mainly because, listen to this. It has ASMR. No, I mean it is interchangeable for termination. Basically, you now have a default stock cable with modular termination, which for some people is definitely a plus. If some people want to try it unbalanced, then you get to do so. If you have devices that can do balance, then you get to do so. Definitely a plus, I guess. And in terms of what I said just now regarding the tips, Tangzu definitely has done justice in terms of this, because not only you are giving the customer a lot of choices, you are introducing people to the idea that ear tips can change sound signature, which is another rabbit hole for another day. Personally, I do find the difference, but I still go about with my personal preference of tips, which is the SpinFit CP145. Now, build and fit, like I mentioned, the head shells are fully metal, but for some reason, let me just give you a context of what I want to say. We usually compare heft to quality, And in terms of that, think of like a Kato, think of like a SimGod, think of like the Acoustum series, think of like the Campfire series. All those head shells are made of metal and they have a heft to it. This thing is only under 7 grams per headpiece. You know, just by feeling it, you can feel that it's light, but at the same time, it is very, very quality. It doesn't have the weight heft to it, but you get what I mean. It feels solid. It feels very, very solid. But with that aside, fit. How does it fit? Me personally, because I have quite a dry ear canal, personally I only use my CP145s because I find that to be the most secure. The original ear tips were the balanced one, if I'm not mistaken, they say that it is a little bit similar to the KB Ear 07 type of tips, and for the base one it is more like a final audio type of tip, if I'm not mistaken. The foam tips, it literally is just like a LeSure tip. Like, let me just look at this. Just look at this. Can you see the difference? Other than one's yellow, one's not. What's the difference? These type of rubber compositions, it's a little bit on the dryish side, and the CP145s are, inherently a little bit more rubbery, a little bit more sticky in terms of the texture. It's not sticky, but it's basically just rubbery, so that when I stick my IEMs into my ears, it fits well and it isolates well. And with all that being said, this is the source I use. This is the graph. Let's finally talk about the sound. And definitely, even though I say I never heard of the original Wu, I can still kind of make some sort of comparison based on the graph alone. So just looking at the graph, the original Wu is definitely more V-shaped. This thing is more of a mild V-shape, but even though I say that, reserve your thoughts till I talk about the bass, mids, and the treble later. This IEM, even though I say that it is more of a mild V-shape IEM, the thing with it is that it has, I feel like I've been saying this a lot of times, but basically this is a V-shape IEM, a mild V-shape IEM with mid-centric to slightly upper mid-centric characteristics to it. Mainly because of the fact that it is a planar IEM, I guess. Because when you listen to planars, you know that things from the mids and up gets a little aggressive. It has that certain planar texture to it, not only from that but also for the bass. But for some reason this one doesn't really have that much bass. The lower frequencies, to be honest, quite neutral in terms of the tuning. I don't know why. Me personally, I'm more preference to a balanced type of tuning, so for me this is perfect, but for bass heads it might not be for you. But nevertheless, if you can try it, just try it, I guess. This thing right here, I think overall from the sub bass to the lower mids to the mid bass will probably be the one that has the most fullness to it. It has body to it, but it is overall still on the leanish side. Lower mids, maybe a little bit less, sounds more lighter, I guess. Sub bass definitely lacks in rumble. It has presence, but it definitely does not have that immersiveness. It definitely does not pull you in with the presence as well as the rumble, which is already quite lacking. But with that being said, the bass region is actually quite clean in terms of the note definition, in terms of the clarity. When bass is being played, it does not have any sort of bloatiness to it, it does not have any color to it. It just sounds clean and clear. Which now we shall be moving on to the mids, where me personally, I feel like this one certain word can be applied not only to the mids but the mids and up: crispy. When we talk about planar IEMs, you all know that there's that certain texture that you're finding, not only for the bass, but also for highs and the mids. This thing is considered to be crispy in some nature, where it sounds brighter, but it does not have that much of a sibilance to it. Vocals, y'all know I like my vocals. Female vocals on this is amazing, I would say. It is very clear, it is quite crisp. The tonality, I would say, is a little bit on the brightish side, but otherwise it would still be considered natural, I guess. Little to no instance of sibilance from what I personally hear, but for some people they might say that it is a little bit aggressive on the S's and the X's. Me personally, I still feel like it's fine. It's very, very immersive. You can feel like the vocals are quite forward. Male vocals may be a little bit more abrasive, I guess. Yes, that's a word when I keep saying grittiness. Abrasive. Male vocals might feel a little bit less clean. It might feel a little bit more gritty. It might feel a little bit more abrasive, but nevertheless still quite good. Instruments wise, everything, it is very clean. It is very clear. It does not really have that much of a coloration to it, but in terms of what I said about the crispiness to it, owing to the micro details and the macro details in the mids and going on to the upper mids, like I said, it is sort of a mid-centric IEM. This thing performs quite well in terms of that. when you are listening to specifically, I don't know why, but specifically, the thing that I notice very, very prevalently is strings. Anything that is a guitar, anything that is a violin, I feel like it has that advantage because of the crispiness to it. It makes it feel very, very presentable. It makes it feel like it has a lot of energy to it, even though it does not push it to the point where it is too aggressive. This thing is very, very balanced in terms of like, it presents to you a lot of stuff. It presents to you more than usual, but it does not go overboard with it. Comparing this to the Lashowa S12s, which is literally the first and one of the only two IEMs that one of the only two planar IEMs that I've heard. The other is the PR1, which I personally like, but you know, it's not the same price range. The Lashowa S12s definitely have more bass, and in terms of the mids and the highs, it is very, very aggressive. Sounds amazing, but after that, you know, it gets a little bit fatiguing to listen. This thing, the longer you listen to it, the more enjoyable it gets, is what I'm saying. The immersiveness due to the mid-centricness and the crispiness of this whole IEM's tuning nature makes it all the worthwhile and even more enjoyable as you listen to it for longer periods of time. The more you listen to it, you're slowly getting more familiar to its tuning. You're slowly expecting more from the mids in terms of listening to this IEM, which I personally really enjoy throughout using this. Heck, I really stopped using my XBA and my Katos when I had this. This is really a very good IEM, and usually when I listen to other stuff like the Winner, I only listen to it purely for the review. This, I'm still listening to it now, probably gonna listen to it even more once I'm done with the video. I don't think I can say that much for most IEM. SimGods, I praise it for its prowess, but I don't use it frequently. This, I'm still using it constantly and using it as much as I can. Too much compliments at this point, and I'm just going to use this one thing to segue into the treble, which is micro details and macro details. This thing, probably owing to its soundstage and owing to the planar driver, the crispiness is only one thing. The other thing is that it has a very significant airiness to the micro details and the macro details. Not saying that it is very amazing, but you can definitely feel that that airiness is there. It's just enough. It accentuates the soundstage, basically. It accentuates the whole ambiance of everything. I guess this is again more owed to the technicalities of it, but we'll talk about it later. Treble, on the other hand, I would say it doesn't really have that much of an aggression compared to the Lashowa S12s from what I remember. I mean, granted, it is still a little bit peaky, but it is not to the point where I feel uncomfortable listening to stuff like that. Like I mentioned during the SimGod video, the peakiness of it is very apparent, and it is very splashy when you're listening to fast rock. This thing doesn't really have that much of that problem, where I feel like, because I mentioned it is crispy. Crispiness, I define it as something that has very sharp treble, but it rounds off at the very end. Think of it like it has compression. It does not clip over a certain decibel. This thing handles treble quite well. Guitar shreds at this level is also done very immaculately, but I feel like maybe just a little bit. It does lack a little bit in treble extension. But then again, at the same time, planars are quite famous for the texture, and the texture is mostly owed to the transients of the lows, the mids, the highs. So, you know, nevertheless, still a very good IEM. Finally, let's talk about the technicalities. In terms of technicalities, I have nothing to say. This is actually quite a good IEM. I never actually noticed any discrepancies that's worth mentioning, because the moment that I wore this and I started listening to my songs, the soundstage is very wide. I mean, I still have a Kato right now and I still have my XBAs, and what I want to say is that what I wanted to say is that the Katos are actually quite good in terms of technicality. Everything is quite good. One problem that I have overall is still the soundstage. The soundstage for that price, to me, I think it's still very average. This thing really stretches it out in terms of its width and the depth. I'm not really sure about the height. I never really noticed it that much, but the first impression is definitely it has a lot of width. So much so that I would compare this to something like the XBA A3. If the XBA is a 10 out of 10 in terms of soundstage, this thing is probably like a 8.5, I guess. The SimGods, I would say, if this is an 8.5, that thing is around 7, I guess, but you get the idea. It's 2023. things are slowly improving, and I would say the IEMs that are coming out right now, it's also steadily beating out the predecessors within the same price bracket. This thing definitely beats it out. Imaging and separation, I don't think I need to say anything more other than the soundstage is already that wide. Imaging is also owed to the fact that it has quite a wide soundstage, so that everything is being separated quite well, and yeah, nothing more I could say. Detail retrieval is also on par with the price. I wouldn't say it's exceptional, but the point being is that I don't really have a general idea as to how good an IEM at $200, how good should the detail retrieval be. But I think basically just repeating this, I think I've already answered my own questions. If this is used as the gold standard for detail retrieval, if a $200 IEM needs to have this level of detail retrieval, I think most things will probably lose it out. I remember the BQEYZ winners are more or less within the same realms of the Kato. It focuses on very good detail retrievals in terms of micro details and macro details at a certain area. This thing, the Kato, it's good for the mids and a little bit to the upper mids, but in terms of the treble, it is more smoothed out, so you don't really feel like the details are quite intimate. You could say that it has the same amount of detail retrieval, but the presentation is quite different. That thing is relaxed, this thing is very energetic. The micro details on this are quite energetic, quite complementing to the main tracks, so I would say this is quite an enjoyable experience in terms of having its quite good detail retrieval. Dynamics is fair, I guess. I don't really have anything much to say because the technicalities are really already quite good. But anyways, in conclusion, I don't really want to waste that much time anymore because again, first of all, I'm sorry if this video sounds like it's a little bit rushed. Everything I say right now is literally unscripted. I am just saying whatever I remembered based on listening to this pair of IEMs for days. And the bottom line is, I quite like the Heyday. It is quite a very good tuning IEM, but definitely take it with a grain of salt because I am a balanced preference kind of guy. I like the XBA A3s, that is my personal endgame. So yeah, take what I recommend to you with a grain of salt. But other than the fact that it is slightly lacking in the bass side, if we're talking about, you know, in the grand scheme of things, like most people prefer bass, I don't really like that much bass. This thing is still quite good in terms of the technicality, in terms of, you know, the mids and the high presentation. Everything is still quite good for a $200 IEM. And like I said, if this is being used as a standard reference, and from my listening, I listened to the Tangzu, is it called the Oxygen? I can't really remember it within that price point. The Tangzu Oxygen, the Katos, the BQEYZ winners, the Lashua S12s. Oh, the Lashua S12s is a different thing, but you get what I mean. Technicalities wise, this thing still probably triumphs a lot, mainly because of the soundstage, the very good imaging and separation, the presentation, and also the very well balanced detail retrieval across all of those. Like I mentioned, the Lashua S12s is an outlier to all of this. It is cheaper and it is still very well performing, kind of like this, but I can't get past the part where it is a little bit too aggressive to listen to for long periods of time. I still remember I cannot listen to more than one full album after sitting down listening to that. It is a little bit too much for me. This, like I said, crispy. It is good. It is not fatiguing to listen for hours on end. So far, my longest record I think is about 2 hours listening to this, and I still feel okay. I still feel fine. There's no fatigue. There is no discomfort when wearing this IEM. So take that in mind if you feel like you want to consider this IEM. So with all that being said, again, I'm very sorry if there's no written review for now. I am honestly quite busy with uni work, and I'm quite busy with other side income type of work. But stay tuned. I have 2 more videos coming up, which probably should be done by next week, I guess. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.